At the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop, if it's on our shelves, it's history.
Welcome to Virtual Book Signing. I'm Daniel Weinberg, and we're here at the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop as usual. And if you're watching on the archive, we'll most likely have books signed for you, first editions, to help you produce a wonderful first edition signed collection that is on your shelves and would be good reading and as well good for future generations, we hope. So without further ado, today we have Michael Adams here, a Regents Professor of History Emeritus, Northern Kentucky University. He is the author of The Best War Ever, America and World War II, and one you probably know, Our Masters, the Rebels, A Speculation on Union Military Failure in the East, 1861 to 65, which is the winner of the Jefferson Davis Prize for Best Civil War Book. Did it get a Northern Prize or just Southern Prize?
Yes, I always wondered if that would make me unpopular above Mason-Dixon line.
Oh, okay, well, we'll talk about that a little later. Today, we have Michael here for his latest book, Living Hell, The Dark Side of the Civil War, a John Hopkins Press publication, 292 pages, and it's $29.95, unillustrated, and we'll talk about that too. So, Michael, happy to have you here.
Happy to be here.
And tell us a bit, how did you get to this book? Why this book? What produced in your mind that this is the next thing that we need to read?
All right, that's a very good question. I've been interested in the subject of war all my life and came to the Civil War, as I think many people did in our generation, through the Classics Illustrated Red Badge of Courage, and continued to study war, became my profession. But as I've gone on in that study, the picture for me has increasingly darkened, that the high costs of war have become more and more central in my view. Now that coincided with my need during the years when I was an administrator to get away from the committee meetings and the report writing and just go to a library, or when my wife Susan and I were away at a conference, go into their library, just do some Civil War reading to bring my tension down, enjoy. And I quickly began to realize I was seeing remarkable material. We stereotype the Victorians as people who were repressed, who didn't talk about things. But in fact, I found that the memoirs, the letters, the diaries, even unit histories are strikingly candid, and I was building this body of material. And then Bob Brugger at Hopkins talked to me and said, I want you to do that. My wife Sue said, yes, you should. They were my two guides in this. And so we did it. And it is intended to remind us that, yes, wars are sometimes necessary, they can bring out the best in people, but they're terribly destructive. And this one, I think, for Americans, was the destructive war.
Well, both sides, of course, were American, so
yes,
we had no one else to destruct upon.
Exactly. And I think that's why it's partly good to look at this war, because, as you and I both know, it's the last time parts of America were invaded, and huge numbers of the population felt what it was like to be in a war zone. Something that, my background coming from Britain originally, war was much more a present thing. Even as a teenager, when I was going into Sheffield, Leeds in my area, to illicitly drink beer or go to a coffee shop and listen to the Beatles, whole blocks of urban housing factories had not been cleared. This is the 1960s. So in Europe, war was a first-hand affair, Whereas I think for Americans, the Civil War is how we can best suggest this is what it is like to suffer war firsthand, as opposed to today, that relative small number of our population who actually do go to fight.
I was going to ask you, coming from across the pond, just how that affects your view of the American Civil War. And I think you've just touched upon something of interest here that,
Right.
not that you won't otherwise too,
Right.
but that wars in Europe is more firsthand and constant. Here
It
we are,
is.
look at Crimea, look at Ukraine, who's caught in the
Yes.
middle of East and West now.
Yes.
You were back in the 20th century all of a sudden.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I think coming from Europe, you cannot avoid having war in your life. And I should qualify that by saying I'm not in any sense downplaying the pain, suffering of Americans who have lost, their relatives, friends in war. But I don't think it's such a day-by-day experience. And I think that does affect one's picture. In fact, at times, I have had to in my career back off because of being European. The people I worked with in the Civil War have reduced me to tears. There's no question about that. Their stories are so powerful. But I think Europe has so devastated itself with war, the two world wars most particularly, that to be European is to have that sense with you all the time. Sue and I just rewatched a wonderful movie based on a play by David Haig about John, the son of Rudyard Kipling, who went overseas in World War I, was in the trenches less than a week before he died, and he died at 18 years and 1 day. And when I watched that, I cannot help shedding a tear, but my fists are also clenched because I feel that war was so foolish.
Many of them are they not?
Yes.
But let's continue with along this line for a moment.
Okay.
Because you wrote on World War II
Yes.
and the European experience that you've had. How would you compare the experiences of the soldiers of World War II and the Civil War?
Right.
Did they have? They must have had some similarities and other differences, certainly in the impact on their bodies.
Right. I think for the combat soldiers, the experience is very, very similar. In fact, one of the things that fascinated me writing this book was that I could identify every form of emotional damage that we have identified since World War I and, the development of psychiatry. The combat exhaustion that infantry felt in World War II was very definitely the same in the Civil War. The shell shock that they experienced from incoming rounds. The misery, I think one of the things that as civilians in the United States or other advanced countries that we take for granted is being clean. But if you read, for example, Eugene Sledge on Okinawa, where they were absolutely filthy and couldn't expose themselves, so they're doling, their waste material over the top. And when he finally could bathe, I think after 6 weeks, he took his socks off and a layer of skin came with him. That is so similar to the Civil War, where they lived in mud and dirt. I'd say that perhaps the only difference would be, because of medical technology, the soldier in World War II, and then progressively since then, has a better chance of survival. But I think the experience was much the same. I think where we do differ as we move forward in time is that the Civil War experience was more universalized. In World War II, for example, the combat infantry, the GIs, were drawn from a relatively narrow segment. They're very highly white male because, of course, African Americans were denied combat service, so they couldn't press civil rights issues. The cartridge box going to the ballot box. And so white males, dominantly those who had not gone on to college or even finished high school. And it falls on this relatively minor group. Often people will say, why do we have so few veterans of World War II who have PTSD? Well, actually a lot of them do. But they're a relative minority of the millions who were in uniform. They bore the brunt. They were at the sharp end. Whereas I think in the Civil War, we're looking at a much broader segment. And then it gets progressively narrower. I think of Robert Gould Shaw, for example, in the Civil War, from this prominent Boston family who gives his life leading a black regiment. I think that would be more unusual today to see that segment of the population. And I think it was Theodore Lyman of General Meade's staff in the killing time of 1864, who looks across at the rebels coming at them and being mowed down in windrows, and he looks at the officers showing that amazing gallantry that they did. The Civil War officer, it just amazes me, their courage. And he says to himself, these people are capable of a heroism that's too rare to be lost. Today, I don't think we say that because dominantly, perhaps, many of the most privileged do not feel obliged to serve.
I'm going to, now your book, of course, is replete with graphic detail, which is what you want us to see and hear in our armchairs as we sit and enjoy our hobby. I've thought of this many times over the decades that, here we are sitting and looking at, our entertainment is the slaughter of tens of thousands of young men and even women. So to get a sense of that, the 12-year-old in me loved this part of your book. Tell us what happened when a smoothbore entered the body.
Okay, and I will just say parenthetically, I share your sense of ambivalence, but I've been interested in war all my life, and I've occasionally wondered, does this make me really weird? It's like, I also watch American football, and coming from Cincinnati, you have to be almost sick to be a pro football fan. But anyway, what happened when a smoothbore round entered the body, if we just track back a second, the original flintlock musket, as you know very well, fired by a flint hitting a metal pan with powder in it and then going into the barrel. And it usually fired a round lead ball that was not fitted to that weapon. A rifle ball had to be screwed down or hammered down. Now, by the time of the Civil War, that weapon has improved. It doesn't use a flint. It has a little waterproof cap to fire it. And the round is now a conical ball or bullet, and it is made to enter the rifle as a smoothbore bullet. It doesn't touch the grooving. But when it's fired, it's hollow at the base. Gases enter it, pressing it into the rifling, and it has concentric circles on the exterior that fit that rifling. That means it is fast to load, but it has greater range. It's accurate to 500 or more yards. The problem is, and to get to your question, I've rambled around it long enough, I think. When that lead bullet, that soft lead bullet, expands laterally to fit the rifling, it loses its stability, if you like, its strength. It will come out not sharp like a modern 3.3 or something, but it is flattening out, and it's soft lead. So that if it hits me here, and it hits that bone, it's going to spread even further. And it's going to shatter the bone, And this is why Civil War surgeons so quickly went to amputation. They were not butchers. I have the greatest respect for them. They were dedicated and they were skilled. A good surgeon could take off a simple fracture like this in under a minute and a half. It is remarkable. But that capacity of the mini round to create enormous damage came from its actual technical properties to make it a rifle ball. And